One must not have the heart to harm others, and one must not have the heart to guard against others. This sentence appeared in everyone's heart at the same time. Wasn't what just happened the best way to verify this sentence? Especially Penelope and Harper, who had turned against the sisters, had a deep impression of this sentence. Charles said to the three girls still standing in the dormitory, "If the army continues to organize a large evacuation, they should have already made their move. If you are willing to believe me, I could send you to the army. But even under the army's protection, you must remember to hide. Hide your food and your appearance." In this chaotic world, only Canada's army can be called an army. However, even if it was Canada's army, there was a limit to what they could do. Some people said that faith could defeat everything and could give many examples. They even scoffed at those failures and thought they were not firm enough. In fact, in such a drastic change in the world, beliefs could make it easier for one to survive. However, it was too difficult to rely on assumptions to protect others. Harper mustered her courage and said, "Can I follow by your side?" She was a smart girl. Otherwise, she would not have given up on food to save her life before those girls attacked. But she could tell that Charles was safer than anyone else. At least, he was more reliable than these sisters. Charles said, "My side is not very safe, so it is better to follow the army to a safe place. However, if possible, I hope you can help me find Lena after we reach our destination and take care of her as much as possible." Although his sister might not be in much danger in the new fortress city, it was impossible to guard against the hidden danger. He could see that Harper was a brilliant girl. Her wit could play a role in many situations. Harper nodded. She understood that the only link between her and Charles was Lena. Instead of trying to please Charles, it might be closer to saving the country. Although Charles's image differed from the sunny and cheerful leader she had seen before, although this image made people feel that strangers were not allowed to enter, it could bring more security to the people around them. Blair nervously said, "Do you really want to follow him?" Harper comforted. "Even if the next evacuation army comes, it is impossible to gather everyone from door to door. So it is more likely that, like the last time, after large-scale publicity, those who can keep up with it can only pretend to not see." Blair's mouth was wide open. "How can the army give up on us?" Harper said, "I believe Canada's army would rather sacrifice their own lives than give up the ordinary people. And until now, there are still some soldiers who have maintained their faith. But even so, what they can do is limited. They will not sacrifice the people who have been protected to save some people." Blair's expression was gloomy as she nodded. She said calmly, "Then where are these people?" She was obviously referring to the girls who wanted to snatch their food. Charles asked, "What do you think we should do with them?" However, although he was talking about the two of them, his gaze fell on Harper. Clearly, he only had his eyes on her. A trace of killing intent flashed in Harper's eyes, but in the end she still said, "After all, they are my classmates. After snatching our things, even if the relationship between sisters is broken, it will have nothing to do with us from now on." Charles saw the killing intent in her eyes and felt a little gratified in his heart. When the girls lying on the ground and moaning in pain heard this, they immediately crawled in front of Harper. "Harper! Harper! We are the best sisters. We were just muddle-headed just now. Harper, please take us with you." However, Harper did not have any reluctance to leave. Instead, she directly picked up her luggage and said, "Let's go." Looking at the already prepared suitcase, the corner of Charles's mouth revealed a smile. "Very good. You are very good. I hope you can help my sister." Harper nodded and said, "I will. After all, we are really good sisters." Penelope coldly snorted. "That's right. Compared with these plastic sisters, Lena is the best person. I truly regret not leaving with Lena." They had also heard that an army had been attacked by a horde of monsters. So they had given up on going together with the first batch. But now, they regretted it. However, there seemed to be an opportunity to benefit from a disaster right up before them. But of course, it all depended on whether they could grasp it. The girls who were left behind saw that the few of them left without any reluctance to leave. One after another, they cursed. "All of you will die. You actually left this safe place. You will definitely be eaten by monsters. I curse you all. You will definitely encounter monsters when you go out. In any case, they had already revealed their tender feelings for each other. Now that they were cursing, they naturally wouldn't have any bottom line. At the dormitory entrance, he had originally wanted to lock the door. Still, when he heard these words, he silently destroyed the lock. The rest would be left to the heavens themselves. Just as he was about to head to the school gate, the students who had stayed behind suddenly rushed toward him, their faces full of fear and anxiety. "Save us! There's a monster here! Save us!" Behind them was a group of crows covered in red blood. Their eyes were filled with red as they rapidly devoured a corpse. When the students saw Charles, it was as if they had seen their savior. They ran toward him. One of them had a pair of blood-red eyes on his body. "Everyone, don't panic. Don't get close to me and affect my performance," Charles said coldly. "These are just birds that have eaten the zombie's corpse. They aren't much of a threat. You can deal with them with the stick in your hands if you don't panic." After saying that, he shot out the flying dagger he had just made, shooting a few blood crows. Alice's 2 water blades shot down the 2 crows hanging on one of her classmates' bodies. Then, she cast a water healing spell on her classmate's body. Charles's words were like a calming pill to everyone. When the students saw Alice display her superpower for the first time, they were even more shocked. "Charles, we are not afraid of them, but we are afraid that we will be bitten by them. So sister-in-law is also so powerful. No wonder he likes her. They are mighty. Follow them. We will definitely be fine." If it was not because the situation was urgent, Alice would be blushing. Behind them, Harper and the other 2's faces were full of fear and fear. If the 3 of them continued to stay in the dormitory, would these blood crows find them? Even if there were no blood crows, would they encounter other dangers? Just as everyone was cheering for the victory about to arrive, someone was horrified to find that the blood crow that Charles had killed had actually revived. Those blood crows shot down clearly had their bodies cut in half by the flying dagger. However, they still struggled and jumped up, their bodies gradually recovering. "There's actually a blood crow commander here." Charles's face sank. The situation had become terrible. Initially, he thought these monsters were just birds that ate medicinal zombies' flesh and blood, saying they were blood crows. In reality, it was praising them. However, they never expected that there was actually a blood crow commander behind these blood crows. If they didn't get rid of this blood crow commander, these blood crows would revive endlessly. Although he could directly escape, these students were in danger. At this moment, Aaron suddenly said, "Everyone, run quickly. He's going to choose someone to sacrifice." By the time he said this, he had already escaped to the corner of the street. After shouting this, he was the first to choose to escape and quickly disappeared. When the students heard Aaron's words, they suddenly recalled the scene of Charles sacrificing Pamela as a sacrifice. They did not overthink at that time, and just wanted to live. Furthermore, Pamela was a person who deserved it, so it did not add to their guilt. Now that Charles had encountered another troublesome enemy, would he choose another person to sacrifice? "Run! Run, hurry up! I don't want to die!" "He left us by his side, perhaps to use us as sacrifices." Thinking of this, the students looked at each other a few times, then turned around and ran away at the same time. To them, it was only a little guilt for others to treat them as sacrifices. However, if they wanted them to sacrifice themselves, they would not have such a fearless spirit of sacrifice. Moreover, even if they were lucky enough to survive this time, it was hard to guarantee that they would not choose to be treated as an offering the next time. Charles did not know whether to laugh or cry at the escape of these people. The sacrifice he chose when he summoned the hellish creature could be his essence blood or an enemy he captured alive. Previously, he only chose Pamela as a sacrifice because he wanted to find an excuse to kill Pamela. This is good too. It will reduce the burden. Charles didn't care about the departure of these people. Since they had chosen to leave him, it would be fine if he wanted to give them the opportunity. Although the cultivation method could not be handed over to anyone, he would not be stingy with the cultivation method of becoming a power artist. Anyway, these things would be researched by someone in less than a week. Their departure now could only be that they missed this opportunity. Hence, he said to Alice, "Protect them well. I'll go and kill the leader of these blood crows and come back." As he spoke, he shot out like an arrow, leaving the bow. His power of thunder perception range had already reached 40 feet. However, he was still unable to find the position of the blood crow commander. However, this 40-foot range included height and underground. Therefore, as long as he kept changing his position, he would definitely be able to find the position of the blood crow commander. Blair leaned beside Penelope and quietly said, "Why are those students so afraid of him? What do they mean by sacrifice just now?" Harper interrupted. "We do not need to know too much now. We only need to know one thing. That is with his strength. No matter what he wants to do to us, we have no room for resistance. At least now he is protecting us." As she spoke, she pointed in the direction of the dormitory. "You don't think the dormitory's windows can block these blood crows, do you?" Blair's face turned white. Then she obediently nodded her head. Harper was right. Even if Charles had any bad intentions, it would be a matter of the future. But at least Charles was protecting them. If Charles did not come, their dormitory would be unable to withstand the blood crows' attacks. "Over there!" After moving to another place, Charles's eyes turned cold. The javelin in his hand flew out of his hand. It drew a straight line in the air and pierced through a tree. Caw! A big blood-red bird let out a mournful cry. Then it flapped its injured wings and left the place. Commander Bloodcrow's essence was, after all, demonic beasts. Nevertheless, his instinct to seek benefits and avoid harm still existed. Since he was no match for it, he could only flee. A slight mistake, 1,000 miles away. Charles was even more furious at those old men in the factory. These useless people killed the most useful people and made him only have defective goods. If the javelin could have been sharper, perhaps he would have left the leader of the Blood Crows behind. Since the Blood Crow commander had escaped, there was no need for the rest of the Blood Crows to stay, so all of them dispersed one after another. However, there were still a few Blood Crows wandering around the other corners of the campus as if they were searching for prey that had survived. "The danger has been resolved. We should find a safe place," Charles called out to them. Penelope looked at Charles with envy. "It would be great if we could have such power." Charles said, "If you want it, I can teach you." Penelope was pleasantly surprised. "Really?" Charles nodded and said, "It's just that this kind of training is dangerous. Let's find a safe place. I will tell you all about the pros and cons. As for whether you want to cultivate or not, it will depend on you all. This world is unfair to begin with. Those who awaken naturally will only have to face external risks on their path of growth. However, if one became a power artist or a supergenetic warrior and obtained a pre-celestial superpower, not only would one encounter danger while getting it, but even the path of cultivation would also be extremely dangerous. What was even more infuriating was that even if he were to obtain the results of his cultivation with a slim chance of survival, he might not necessarily be able to get a higher achievement from someone else's innate talent. However, while many people complained about this, those truly determined and decisive had already embarked on this path. They had already spent the time of others complaining about the world's injustice to make this injustice lean toward them. Training is dangerous? When the girls heard the danger, they felt an inexplicable fear. Harper looked around and sighed. "Is it more dangerous than this world?" Charles smiled approvingly. "Of course not. The path of cultivation might be a narrow escape, but if one does not cultivate, one who does not have strength in the future will not survive in this world." Harper could see this, and it could be seen that she was different from Pamela's little intelligence. She was really an intelligent woman with wisdom, the kind that could arouse her interest. "If what you said is true, then this should be the place the army needs to pass the next time they retreat." Standing on the rooftop of a 3-story villa, Charles opened the map. He explained to everyone, even if the army will change their route when they pass this city, there are a few main roads and traffic nodes that must be passed. So we just need to wait here, and we can wait for the army. Everyone nodded thoughtfully. Blair weakly asked, "I have a question." "Speak." "Do we have no problem occupying other people's homes like this?" Blair said worriedly, "This is another family's villa. What if they treat us as robbers when they come back?" Her moral values were still stuck in the old era. Otherwise, she would not have stood up and defended Penelope when she was bullied. Of course, it was also because of this that Charles brought her along. Sometimes kindness would kill others, but when she needed it, she was more willing to believe in more kind-hearted people. That's a good question. Although Charles answered Blair's question, his eyes inadvertently glanced at Harper. When we passed by this villa, the door was open. Unless the master of this family welcomes zombies and those monsters by the road, the master of this place has already given up on this family. Blair's face turned red. The former was naturally impossible. Even the high school students who were not mature knew that when there was danger outside, they had to close the doors and windows. People who opened the door like this either ran away or their brains were eaten by zombies. Alice felt a little uneasy when she saw Charles glancing at Harper, intentionally or not. Could it be that Charles had taken a fancy to this little girl? Harper was only 17 years old. Although her body was well developed, it was still far from her. So where did he take a fancy to this little girl? When she had always been by Charles's side, she had taken it as a matter of course and did not worry too much. But when an opponent who could rival her appeared by Charles's side, she suddenly realized. It turned out that her position wasn't that stable. Thinking of this, she became even more determined in her heart. Charles did not notice Alice's uneasiness. Secondly, when we came in, there were some traces of packing up. Many clothes and food in the kitchen were taken away. The owner of this village should be the first batch of people to evacuate. Penelope asked, "Could it be that it was made by bandits who entered the house?" Charles said, "If it was the robbers, there would at least be signs of a chest being overturned. But there are only signs of a hurried packing up, which means that the owner is very familiar with the layout of the items here." Harper nodded. These details might not be difficult to notice. Still, this kind of thinking could become a guarantee for her future survival. Charles then used a few ropes to wrap the door handle in the nail. Then he said, "Remember this structure? This is a simple anti-theft chain. It is very easy to open it from the inside, but to open it from the outside will destroy the entire rope." Harper nodded and silently remembered everything. Penelope was a little impatient. "But didn't you want to teach us how to become superpowered people?" Charles said, "No hurry. I will teach you now." Hearing Charles's words, Penelope and Blair smiled happily. Only Harper felt a little pity. In her opinion, although these fighting and killing abilities were important, it was clear that those survival abilities were what they needed more now. After Charles told them the cultivation methods of Power Artist, he also poured a surge of origin energy into their bodies, allowing them to directly cross the most difficult step at the start. He didn't know if this would cause instability in their foundation. Still, he knew that the so-called foundation was a joke in this post-apocalyptic era. Using the fastest speed to obtain the ability to protect themselves was the most important thing. Before you could not deal with the impending crisis, the so-called long-term future was a meaningless sentence. While teaching the three women, he also conveniently taught the cultivation methods of the beautiful female cultivator, Sister Bethany. Finally, he called out Harper, handed her a steel dagger, and said, "Hide this well. When it is possible to not use it, it is best to try not to use it." Harper nodded and said, "I understand. Survival is more important than fighting." Charles injected an extract amulet into Harper's body and said, "You should know what you should do." Feeling the abundant power of thunder in her body, Harper's face was full of shock. You can simply build a superpower army like this. This strand of power of thunder directly broke through one of her major circulatory cycles, making her a true warrior in one fell swoop. Moreover, she felt that the power of thunder was not exhausted yet, and it could still continue to increase. Charles shook his head. "This is at the price of slowing down my cultivation speed." Harper said gratefully, "I understand." This was a deal. Charles was going to pick up his parents. Then Lena, a person without anyone to rely on, could be safer with the help of such a good sister. Charles said, "All right, you should go back quickly. It's too late to go back. Your sisters are going to be suspicious." As the saying goes, one does not suffer from a lack of numbers, but does not have an equal number of patients. Right now, there is no doubt between the three sisters. After all, they used to stand on the same side. Right now, their relationship is at the stage of strengthening. However, if she was discovered by the other two girls, it was inevitable that they would have strange thoughts. Although this thought might be a little petty to judge a gentleman's heart, testing human nature had always been foolish. Before Charles, it had always been foolish to test human nature. Charles could do this because he had sufficient confidence in his strength and could control the overall situation. Harper could not test human nature. After sending Harper away, Alice entered the room vigilantly and said, "You did not do anything to her, right?" Charles's vision turned black. "We just chatted for less than 2 minutes. Are you so unconfident in me?" "Pah! Who told you this?" Alice's face was red, and she said softly, "However, it is not impossible to try." Charles smiled. "What did you just say? I didn't hear you." Alice's face turned even redder. She raised her voice a little. "I said, if you want to treat me, forget it. I will leave." After saying that, she lowered her head and was about to turn around and leave. However, how could Charles let go of this opportunity? He grabbed Alice and said, "Little demon, stir up my fire. If it doesn't extinguish, do you still want to run?" In the end, the little white rabbit does not escape the big bad wolf's clutches. Since it had already aroused the big gray wolf's appetite, in the end, it could only be eaten dry and wiped clean. In the villa, there was a gorgeous bed full of traces of battle. Alice snuggled in Charles's arms. After all, it was her first time. The intense battle, just now, made her unable to bear it. Right now, her back was aching, and her legs were aching. She just wanted to take a good rest. However, carrying such a man really gave her a sense of security. Charles did not light a cigarette after the incident. Instead, he asked softly, "Leave it to me like this. You won't regret it, will you? You've always blamed me for being cold and heartless." Alice shook her head. "If you were cold and heartless, you would not have fought that monster, even if you were heavily injured and unconscious when your classmates encountered the lion claw beast. Because with your strength, you could have abandoned everyone and escaped alone. Since you did not do so, you were not really heartless." She was also hesitant these few days because she thought she would choose a man who was full of sunshine and cared about people very much. But she did not expect to go and give herself an ice block. But it didn't matter anymore. To her, the most important thing was only one thing. That was, Charles wouldn't leave when she was in danger. Of course, Charles was such a person in her previous life. He was full of sunshine and looked at everything around him with the most optimistic attitude. It was a pity that Alice died early. The two of them were destined to die together. In this life, Alice met Charles. It was just that Charles was no longer the sunny boy in his previous life. Charles smiled. "You were the first to praise me, the man-killer fiend, for being affectionate." Alice said, "Also, you are not living for a person, are you? You're just afraid that you'll be dragged down by some people. Perhaps it is difficult to get your approval, but as long as you agree, you will protect it with all your might. I do not know what you have experienced in the past, but I always feel that your past experiences must be full of pain." Charles fell silent. The scenes of his past life appeared in his mind again. He once held some pedantic moral values. After all, it was his parents who had instilled them into him. He initially thought that he should be the main character of the world. He should be able to stick to his beliefs in the dark era and bloom his own light. However, because of his stupidity, his parents, Captain, Elaine, all of the important people around him left one after another. They had finally destroyed his foolish belief. The moment he was reborn, he had already made up his mind. If kindness could protect the people around him, he would become a saint. If cruelty could protect the people around him, then he would become a devil. If these so-called beliefs can't do it, he will walk a path that belongs to himself. What he did had nothing to do with justice or evil. It had nothing to do with kindness or cruelty. In the past, morals and the legal framework could not restrict him. All he could do was protect himself and the people around him. Just as both sides were immersed in this silence, Alice suddenly jumped up and said, "Not good. Will we get pregnant like this?" Being pregnant in this kind of environment was definitely a very dangerous thing. She was not willing to take the risk. Charles smiled and said, As long as you wash clean, everything will be fine." With a blank face, Alice blinked. "Then I will go and take a bath." Charles helplessly leaned into Alice's ear and said, "I'm talking about using superpower." Alice's face became redder and redder. Then finally she kicked Charles out of bed and said with a red look, "How can a superpower be so useful?" Charles quickly put on his clothes and threw a box of medicine over. He said, "The anti-toxicity and resistance of a superpower possessor will greatly improve. How effective can a contraceptive medicine be for a superpower possessor? I don't know. You can try it yourself, but I still suggest you use your bath power." Alice took the birth control medicine shyly and angrily. "You prepared it long ago." This bastard must have been prepared to take advantage of her, but he pretended to be an Iceman. Thinking of this, she threw the pillow at Charles. Charles left as if he was running away. "I still suggest you use your bath power." Alice blushed as she looked at the medicine in her hand. The redness on her face grew more and more, but her eyes became more determined. "I cannot drag Charles back." Then blue light filled her entire body. The refreshed Charles briefly inspected the villa's condition, then walked out of the door. It was getting dark now. Of course, going out at night was dangerous, but it would not be a problem if it was just patrolling the surroundings. Most of the villas here were already empty. Even the cars in the villas had been driven away. If one wanted to search for valuable items in these villas, it would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. One would go to the supermarket or warehouse when many places were not explored in the early stages. It was the best choice. At this moment, 3 cars suddenly stopped in the nearby villas. Who would stop at this time? Charles was a little curious and hid nearby. Chief Lincoln stopped in front of the most luxurious villa. A group of bodyguards in black suits walked out of the car with batons in their hands. One of the bodyguards ordered, "Go in and search. Don't let go of any corner. Ensure no monster is hidden and threatens Miss Diane's safety." Miss? Charles was a little stunned when he heard the name. In this new era, most of the past identities have been overturned. The bosses of a factory had been tied up by their subordinates before they could see them. Even their own women could not be protected. Those who could still have a group of loyal subordinates at this time were either good at their previous ideological work or had displayed great abilities after the apocalypse. The arrival of the apocalypse gave many people a chance to rise, but it was only a chance after all. Those people who like to cling to the rich and powerful, who like to follow other people's brainless lives just because they recognized a leader, even in the apocalypse, they didn't have much of a future. On the contrary, those who wanted to improve seized every opportunity in the post-apocalyptic era and actively advanced. Although most of these people had fallen halfway, as long as they could survive, they would be able to have a promising future. After the bodyguards finished their inspection work, they lowered their heads to a car in the middle. They said, "Miss, the inspection has been completed. There is no danger inside." Then a woman walked out of the car. She was dressed in a black evening dress and looked very elegant. When she got out of the car, the entire dark sky seemed to have gained a bit of luster. Charles was a little confused at this moment. "I feel a little familiar. I think I have seen her before." Charles had seen too many people in his previous life. He could record everything necessary for everyone, but it would take him a lot of energy. His previous life was full of pain and hatred. Then, of course, he had to focus on memorizing certain people and thinking about how to fight enemies. He could not remember many unimportant things. Besides, although many looked bright and beautiful, after a period of fierce fighting in the apocalypse, the original bright and beautiful faces would be covered in dust. Especially those online celebrities whose parents couldn't recognize them after removing their makeup. For such a woman to be able to make Charles feel familiar, she was already wearing light makeup. "Miss has been wronged." A bodyguard leader lowered his head and said, "I have wronged Miss to stay in this place for a while, but the army will soon pass by this place. We will soon be able to follow the army to a safe place." Miss nodded and said, "You have done very well." The bodyguard said, "This is our honor." Then the young lady entered the villa. It was obvious that she had moved in here. After the young lady entered, the 2 bodyguards responsible for guarding the door spat and said, "You really think of yourself as a superstar. If it wasn't for her influence that allowed us to safely arrive at the fallout shelter, Do you believe he would still support her? Lacey Reynolds' bodyguard chuckled. Speaking of which, there aren't many people who care now, so why don't we... Charles shook his head in secret when he heard such a familiar line. In this world, many bright and beautiful stars could only be turned into playthings for others. Some people even sold their bodies for a bottle of water or food. Now, this celebrity was still putting on airs, but she was able to live because of her value. However, Charles did not intend to care about this matter. Lower your voice. You don't want to live anymore. The bodyguard at the side immediately blocked his mouth. If Captain hears our conversation, we will be dead for sure. The captain is a descendant of the ancient Marshall family. Therefore, killing us will be easy. Ancient Marshall family? Charles, who originally wanted to return to his residence, immediately stopped when he heard this word. After the drastic change in the world, Ohio's martial arts, which had declined previously, suddenly began to revive. Those flower frames that trained one's body were even more effective in absorbing the essence of the power of thunder of heaven and earth. Some of the descendants of the ancient Marshall family even made their family martial arts public, giving birth to many powerful artists in Ohio. It also gave countless civilians the strength to protect themselves. However, such selfless contributors were attacked by some conservative ancient Marshall family, leading to tragedy after tragedy. The tragedy would have continued if it wasn't for that person's appearance. Charles didn't know if the captain they talked about belonged to the conservative or innovative faction. Still, if the other party was an innovative faction, he would owe the other party favor. At this moment, the cold bodyguard said disdainfully, "We've also learned ancient martial arts, and now our bodies have developed vitality. As long as we can surpass the leader, then what do we want to do? We can do whatever we want, right? Besides, who said that if we're going to defeat a person, we must fight head-on? Don't forget what happened to the person who went against the captain. I advise you to speak less. Otherwise, sooner or later, you will die in your mouth." Hearing the conversation between the two, Charles already intended to kill them. They taught you martial arts out of kindness, and this is how you repay them? Because of the experience of being betrayed in his previous life, he hated this kind of ungrateful ingrate the most. But of course, now was not the time to make a move. Otherwise, he would become the public enemy of everyone here. He had nothing to worry about alone, but a burden to deal with. Besides, if he caused a misunderstanding among the ancient Marshall family's disciples, the outcome would be bad. No matter who died, it would be a tragedy. Then he no longer had any thoughts of patrolling the vicinity. Instead, he returned to his own residence. The following day, he suddenly heard a loud noise. He frowned. This seemed to have come from the villa area of, "Miss, you did it on purpose. You must have done it on purpose." A bodyguard stood in one of them, in grief. Well in front of a few pieces of broken bodies, he pointed at the young leader of the bodyguards. He scolded him. "My brother is only practicing the technique you taught him. Why did he suddenly become like this? Is there something wrong with the technique you taught us?" The young disciple of the ancient Marshall family said, "The cultivation technique I taught him is fine. This is how I cultivate myself. I have absolutely nothing to hide from you." The bodyguard said, "In the beginning, 2 people died from energy deviation when they started cultivating your cultivation technique. You said that it was a necessary way to quickly enter the sect. After all, if you want to enter the sect at the fastest speed, you must bear such a risk. But we've already passed through the difficult times, so why is there still such a risk?" The young captain of the bodyguards frowned and said, "I don't know about that either, but you guys didn't get into trouble either." The bodyguard who had killed his brother roared, "I know! It must be that my older brother's cultivation speed is too fast, higher than everyone's realm. That's why it's like this. You must have tampered with the cultivation method passed on to us. After reaching a certain degree, everyone will die. Your heart is really so ruthless." Hearing this, everyone's expression changed. If this was true, everyone's mood was in the hands of the leader. The captain of the bodyguard said, "I don't care if you believe me or not. This is how I train." At this time, a bodyguard checked the broken corpse on the ground and said, "This exploded from within my body. Speaking of which, I seem to have felt my blood vessels swell before when I was training, so I originally thought that it was just a normal phenomenon during training. Still, I didn't expect that it was actually your scheme." "That's right, Captain, you are really too detestable." "Captain, If you don't give us an explanation, we will definitely not let you go." Everyone began to surround the captain. Then they tightly gripped the baton in their hands. Their eyes were filled with hatred, ready to attack at any time. At this moment, Miss opened her mouth and said, "I think this is a misunderstanding. I believe that Kevin Neal will give us an explanation." She stared at Kevin and said, "I believe you. As long as you are willing to give us an explanation, we will understand you." "Kevin, he's here!" Charles felt like his brain was about to explode. He had not expected the famous Kevin Neal to appear as a bodyguard. Charles had intended to simply watch the show, but when he learned that the other party was Kevin Neal, he realized that he could no longer remain on the sidelines. The faces of his enemies from his previous life were engraved in his heart, as were the faces of those who had been good to him. Neal was a selfless person who had dedicated his power arts prowess to his family, and they had driven him out because of it. It was due to his selfless teachings that so many survivors had become power artists who could protect themselves in this post-apocalyptic world. Again, his well-intentioned efforts repaid him in sorrow. His advanced methods for cultivating power artists had proved too intense for many neophytes, driving them berserk. Neal was widely hated for this unforeseen outcome and was cast as a demon in the public mind. Ultimately, the people he had sought to protect had killed him, erecting a statue in his likeness to spit upon. As the environment worsened, people's living conditions grew harsher, and the monsters they faced became more and more powerful. Such desperate conditions shifted opinions about the risks involved with pursuing the power arts. Their very survival depended on embracing Neal's techniques. His disgrace and death had been the fruits of a tragic misunderstanding. Charles well understood his debt to Neal, but now that he had the chance to change everything, he could not remain a passive observer. The onlookers cried, "Neal, are you trying to destroy us? Speak! Are you trying to deliberately harm us? Neal, you cost my brother his life." Looking at the corpse on the ground, Neal's face was full of guilt and remorse. He had only wanted to help people protect themselves. He hadn't known that the energy deviation command could damage internal organs. In his experience, the technique was taxing on the body, but not fatal. The deaths caused by energy deviation terrified and angered his accusers. They projected all their pent-up fear and desperation at him. His silence only intensified their resolve. The attractive young lady being guarded by the men looked at Neal, then at everyone's angry faces. She swallowed the words she had been about to say. Just as the situation was about to escalate into violence, a strident voice rang out. "If you don't want to practice Neal's techniques, no one will force you to, but I believe that even if there is a 50% mortality rate, they are more than worthwhile." The stranger's proclamation startled everyone. One of the burly guards growled, "Where did this loudmouth brat come from? Get lost or I'll make you suffer." Charles wore a mocking smile on his face. What a joke. A herd of sheep angry with a lion. Fortunately, this lion has a good temper. Otherwise, you sheep would have been slaughtered a long time ago. Neal was confused. "Do I know you?" Charles replied, "Although you don't know me, I know you. You are the heir to the Neal family. Oh, well, perhaps not anymore." Charles knew that even an ancient power family in decline would not tolerate their successor working as someone else's bodyguard. Neal demanded, "Who are you? Why did you come here?" Charles realized that he had been wrong. This was not the occasion of Neal's death, but the incident that had triggered his ostracization from his family. One of the guards said, "He might just be another kid who wants to hit on our client. Let me teach him a lesson." As he spoke, he injected his vital energy into his baton and aimed it at Charles's forehead. If Charles were an ordinary person, this move would leave him concussed at best. It could very possibly kill him. The guard was like someone with a new blade, eager to test its sharpness against his own fingers. He had newly obtained great strength and wanted a target to try it out on. Unfortunately, he had picked the wrong person. Neal wanted to stop what he assumed would be a brutal one-sided attack, but he suddenly felt a powerful energy coming from Charles's body. He intuited that the young man had been practicing power arts for some time. Charles kicked the guard in the gut. "Ah!" The guard screamed like a pig being slaughtered. Then he bent down in pain and moaned. You know power arts too? Are you also a descendant of an ancient power family? Charles replied, I am not. But the disciples of such a family taught me the power arts that I practice. If you are not satisfied with your own power arts, I can help you improve. Neil's eyes lit up. Are you like me, intent upon imparting these arts to the people? Charles was moved by Neil's words. When he had faced trouble in his previous life, it was Neil who had helped him. Although Neil had helped a lot of people and might not remember, Charles had to return the favor. He said, This matter is very complicated, but I have a solution for the recent deviation. Neil said excitedly, Really? Can you teach me? It will require an in-depth discussion, Charles replied. My place is nearby. Come with me. But before Neil and Charles could make a move, the guards surrounded the two of them. One demanded, If there's a solution to this problem, why can't you figure it out? Another said, That's right. You killed my brother because of your incompetence. You must pay with your life. Charles coldly declared, Okay, if you want to avenge your brother, then come on. When the guard heard Charles's words, half of his energy dissipated. It was only because he believed he stood on the moral high ground that he could dare accuse Neil so brazenly. In normal times, he wouldn't even dream of farting in front of Neil. The other guards felt the same. They only bullied Neil because they knew he was bound by morals. Neil's eyes were serious as he stared at the man. I am deeply sorry about your brother's death. I will compensate you if there is some way, but it is impossible for me to pay with my life, for there are important things that I must accomplish. The guard was angered by this response. He clenched his fists. Neil had made it clear that he would not pay for someone else's life with his own. If the guard continued to pursue the matter, the consequences would be too great. Charles nodded to himself. If it was anyone else claiming his own life was very important, Charles would have judged him as being like the duplicitous, self-interested Principal Michael Lee. However, it sounded so sincere when it came out of Neil's mouth. Neil was not a rigid person who abided by absolute moral standards. It would have been impossible for a person who staunchly followed the rules to break through the social constraints keeping the power arts out of the hands of the people. However, the collapse of society had come too quickly. Despite his intention to protect the people, he was powerless to reverse the tide of public opinion. The young lady suddenly said, Kevin, aren't you responsible for protecting me? Neil said without turning his head, They'll protect you as well as I could. Call me when you leave. Of course, it's all the same if you don't. Looking at Neil, the young lady's pretty face flushed with resentment. She had always led a high and mighty existence. No one had ever humiliated her like this. Charles asked, How did you end up as her bodyguard? Neil said, She is Haley Summers, a very famous celebrity with significant influence. If she stands up to encourage people, it will reduce a lot of chaos. I can also use her notoriety to better promote power arts. Haley Summers. Charles's eyes flashed with deadly hatred upon hearing this name. He finally understood why this woman was familiar. Although he had never seen her face before, he had read about her in the newspapers. It was she who had used Neil to expand her own influence and become a goddess admired by thousands of people. And when those thousands of people turned against Neil, she had thrown him to the wolves without a second thought. If she is such a pain, you shall let her fend for herself, Charles sneered. Neil said dully, I will allow no harm to come to her. Charles shook his head in frustration. The Haley matter was secondary. He needed to save Neil, period. After arriving at the residence, Charles said to Alice, Call them out. Alice looked at Neil. She was surprised, considering Charles's personality, that he had brought a stranger home. He didn't seem to be the kind of man who liked to save people. However, she did as he asked. When Neil saw the girls, his doubts about Charles disappeared. He could sense the true energy in the girls' bodies. One of them was even stronger than the bodyguards. Charles said to Alice, You can take them away now. Penelope said unhappily, Do you think we are exhibits? Bring us out when you need us, take us down when you don't? Charles raised his eyebrows. What else? Penelope was so angry that she stomped her feet before Alice and Harper led her away. Don't complain too much. They must have something serious to do, Alice advised her. She had given her body and mind to Charles and supported him completely. Charles turned to Neil. As I think you can tell, the energy in their bodies is stable. There are no signs of disorder. Neil said excitedly, That's right. This is exactly what I want to pursue. I never thought that there could be so many talented people in the world. I can't believe that a person like you, who has such a deep understanding of power arts, would appear out of nowhere. Your presence will be a great blessing for the country. Work with me to spread power arts throughout the land. In Neil's eyes, Charles shared the same ideals and had progressed further down the path than he. He assumed Charles was also dedicated to teaching power arts to the people. Of course, Charles would not be joining him. He admired Neil's character, but he had his own path to follow. After all, he admired the scientists who had made significant social contributions, but he didn't want to give up his life and become a scientist's assistant. Neil would be disappointed by his answer. I'm not interested in doing that. I just came up with something by accident, Charles explained. There was a hint of disappointment in Neil's eyes. However, he did not force the issue. The road ahead was very dangerous. If others were unwilling to walk it, how could he forcefully drag them into the fire pit? Neil would be satisfied if Charles could help him improve his cultivation method. Charles said, You undoubtedly discovered that your mastery of power arts improved by leaps and bounds after the cataclysm. The power of thunder energy in your body? No, that's not right. Your potential energy has greatly increased, and your cultivation progress has sped up exponentially. Neil nodded and said, That's right. This seems to be like the recovery of spiritual energy, which can't prevail in this dangerous world that grows deadlier every day. That's why I want to spread my power and give more people the ability to protect themselves. Neil added, Unfortunately, my techniques endangered the people I wanted to help. 5 have already died. Charles said, Actually, the reason for this problem is very simple. The power art that you practice is too, powerful. The effect is too strong. Neil was surprised. Is it wrong to have such a good technique? Charles said, Eating too much good food in one sitting will kill you. Think about it. Even in the old era, your cultivation method could produce thunder energy. In the new era, the effect is truly terrifying. The very physically fit need not fear, but ordinary people require a more gradual process. Neil reflected on this for a few minutes. When Neil heard Charles's words, enlightenment bloomed. As his strength had increased by leaps and bounds, he had neglected to factor in the difference in physical fitness between himself and other people. Reflecting on this, his heart filled with regret. If I had noticed this earlier, perhaps they would not have died. Charles shook his head. The danger in the outside world appeared too quickly. If I had used a weak cultivation method, I would not have survived. Neil asked desperately, What should we do? Charles replied, We must improve the physical quality of the human body. Charles kept nothing from Neil. Superpowered people can absorb the crystal cores in the brain of those monsters and improve their physical fitness. If ordinary warriors could do the same thing, then their physical fitness would also increase. They would be able to contain more thunder energy. Then Charles noted, Of course, this approach may still involve a certain risk, but we don't have the luxury of pursuing a completely safe cultivation method with zero risk. We need a method that allows people to quickly protect themselves. Neil said, You are right. What we need now is a rapid cultivation method. As he spoke, he took out a few medical books from his bag and said, However, potential energy can be integrated into one's metabolism and blood. This can forcefully improve one's physical fitness. Although this will slow down one's cultivation speed, it will be safer. It would be best to create a flexible cultivation method that can be easily adjusted. This way, those with good aptitude can cultivate at a higher speed. Those with poor aptitude can advance more slowly. Charles's words had newly inspired him, and he was impatient to dive into the problem. However, Charles asked, When this kind of technique is developed, do you intend to selflessly teach it to everyone? Neil replied, Of course. This world has become very dangerous. In the foreseeable future, it will become even worse. This way, people can protect themselves. Many will be saved. Charles said, But aren't you worried that these techniques will fall into the hands of bad people? Neil smiled bitterly and answered, This is something that can't be avoided. However, the more there are with the ability to handle danger means fewer will abandon their companions in the face of an attack. Even if it can only reduce a portion of misery, it's still worth it. Neil was not naive. He understood people's evil intentions. Even so, he did not give up on the essential kindness of mankind. When a person is extremely afraid, it is very easy for him or her to lose their mind. When a person commits an unforgivable crime for the first time, it becomes easier to lose his or her moral compass. However, in the absence of such stressors, many people maintained moral values in their hearts. Looking at Neil's determined eyes, Charles knew that it would be very hard for him to change his mind. However, since his cultivation technique could reduce casualties, Neil's future could change. If he could reduce the number of people calling for his blood, the probability of a tragedy occurring would also be reduced. At this moment, Charles, whose hearing was very sensitive, heard Penelope's voice. Harper, didn't the army pass through the city yesterday to evacuate us? Why haven't they come yet? Penelope asked. Harper said, Maybe something has delayed them. Penelope was worried. Could something terrible have happened to the army? Alice said, Don't talk nonsense. Not only do the army have guns and cannons, but they are well trained. They're tough. They know how to survive. Harper sighed and said, I'm afraid they are too concerned with protecting ordinary people. When Charles heard this conversation, he had a flash of inspiration. In this era, when the law had collapsed, the armies of all countries had split apart and disintegrated. Only a small portion of the nation's armed forces still maintained their duties. They insisted on foolish heroism in this dark era, but it was precisely because of their idealistic actions that numerous citizens had a fort to shelter in. Thinking of this, Charles said to Neil, Say, there is a group that is expressly determined to protect the people. Would you be willing to teach this cultivation technique to them first? Neil was stunned. You are saying, Charles smiled, we teach the army. He knew that he and Neil were destined to follow different paths. He did not know how much he could do here. However, this was something he could do. If he could help this group, perhaps he could make this collapsing world a little better. Moreover, he would be leading the way, step by step. If the army were to grow stronger, it would be beneficial for his revenge. Many people wanted to kill Leonard Shaw, but even those who were willing to pay a huge price to kill him were unable to do so. This was because Shaw had the strength to defend an entire region. If Charles planted a seed here, it would depend on Neil whether it would germinate or not. Meanwhile, some bodyguards had come to Charles's residence. One of them said, Miss Haley has asked Neil to come back. Just as the bodyguard spoke, he suddenly saw Alice, and his eyes went wide. Alice said, When they decide to return, they will return by themselves. The guards' eyes were very hateful. Although Alice had grown accustomed to it, she was not willing to talk to them anymore. The bodyguards did not force the issue. Instead, they huddled together to speak privately. They complained, This girl is really righteous. We can't get to Miss Haley. What about the other good-looking girls here? But will Miss Haley be angry? A bodyguard asked weakly. A burly bodyguard thumped his chest. Are you stupid? Even if Miss Haley knows, so what? She'll need our protection. Besides, do we really have to let her know? Another bodyguard said with a fierce look in his eyes, When we get to a safe place, Miss Haley will be worthless. After getting rid of Neil, even that goddess will be at our mercy. When the world had changed, few people could adapt to the realities of the new era, and many had quickly degenerated into their basest selves. Rumors about the end of the world can make people panic, but the actual end of the world had made many people into monsters. Haley's bodyguards wanted to use her influence to make connections with the army. They felt no personal loyalty to her at all. If not for Neil suppressing them, some of them would have already lost control and put their evil thoughts into action. Now, after seeing a few pretty female students, the evil seeds in their hearts had sprouted again. After a while, Neil returned to Haley's villa, feeling optimistic. Although Charles did not have a deep understanding of ancient power arts, his comparison of the human body to the vast stars had profoundly enlightened Neil. Understanding the way power arts had adapted to the new era gave him the feeling of opening the door to a new world. More importantly, this knowledge could reduce the number of casualties during the training stage. Neil thought, perhaps it is because he has not received the orthodox education of an ancient power family member that he can use his imagination without restraint. In comparison, I am restricted by my training. When Neil arrived, the first thing he saw was Haley's cold and beautiful face. She was very dissatisfied with Neil's unauthorized actions. She snapped, "Neil, don't forget that your duty is to protect me. What if I encounter danger while you are away? And you should know the consequences of wandering off when you're meant to be guarding me." Neil said nonchalantly, "You're fine, aren't you? It's true that there are some flaws in your practice of the techniques I taught you. If you want to improve them, come and find me." After he finished speaking, he walked away, then added, "If you are afraid of the risk, you can give up on cultivation. No one will force you. But if you choose to cultivate these skills, you must be prepared to accept risks. If you die, I will not take any responsibility." With that, he returned to his room without looking back. He was a person who broke the old rules that no longer applied to this new world. He knew that sacrifices during the training stage were unavoidable. Guilt was a luxury he could no longer afford. This was the path he had chosen, and he did not expect to die peacefully. Haley gritted her teeth. No one had ever dared to disobey her like this. In Neil's eyes, her desirable appearance was nothing compared with the urgency he felt about improving cultivation techniques. A tall bodyguard standing nearby said, "Miss Haley, Neil is too arrogant. If he's allowed to continue like this, your safety will be in jeopardy." Another bodyguard said, "He does not take Miss Haley seriously. He needs her now, so he is willing to protect her. But the human heart is unpredictable." The bodyguard's words struck Haley as uncomfortably reasonable. Haley's eyes showed signs of conflict. Finally, she said weakly, "You guys should continue to contact the army. Let's see where the evacuation troops escorted by the army are located. They really will try to save everyone. They don't even consider what kind of people are actually worth the effort." She wanted to hate Neil, but when he was cold to her, she panicked. In her current state, she did not have the strength to abandon him. The bodyguards heard the order and left. Then they went to Neil's quarters to learn their cultivation techniques. No matter how unhappy they were with him, mastering this practice was a matter of life and death. They still had to be careful in this apprentice stage. Whatever their personal enmity, they were not willing to give up this hard-earned power. At Charles's residence, everyone gathered at the head of the table. Penelope was worried. "Is something wrong with the army? They should have arrived yesterday, but we haven't seen anyone yet." Charles said, "They must have been slowed down by the refugees not cooperating." Harper asked curiously, "Why are you so sure? Everyone should seize the opportunity to escape with the army and find a safe place." Harper was confused. How could there be people who would not cooperate? Did they not take their lives seriously? Charles said, "People are like this. They will never be content. They always take other people's efforts for granted. When they are unhappy with the slightest thing, they will immediately shout and complain. Until human nature changes, the efficiency of the army will never be great." In his previous life, he had followed the army of the nation. Some soldiers had reacted to the huge threat to their lives by maintaining discipline. Some had simply fled for their lives, disorganized and desperate because they did not have enough food to eat. They shouted and attracted the monsters, and some shameless people had no limits or morals at all as society's restraints collapsed around them. Charles suddenly thought of a problem. Wait a moment. How did the army inform everyone the last time you evacuated? Most of the electronic equipment should have broken down by now. His expression became serious as he realized they might have overlooked a crucial piece of information. Harper said, "It was the troops who went everywhere to inform the people. While clearing out those terrifying monsters, they instructed the survivors to spread the word. Is there a problem?" Charles replied, "Of course there's a problem. In the beginning, most of the monsters weren't strong, so it wasn't too difficult to deal with them. If they continue this course of action now that the monsters have grown in power, they could encounter terrible dangers." He stood up and said to everyone, "All of you wait here. I'm going out for a while." Charles did not usually help strangers, but of course, he would help people who could aid him or his family in the future. The great obsession of his rebirth was to protect his family. If he gave them up in adherence to the cold and ruthless rules, his efforts would be for naught. His younger sister, Nina Federer, had lost contact with him in his previous life because he had missed this crucial period of searching. However, if he ignored the current crisis and went to look for her now, then his parents would be in danger. Whatever might happen, he had to leave a path of retreat for his family. When the girls heard that Charles was leaving, panic flashed in their eyes. Penelope's little face went pale. "What if we run into those monsters after you leave?" she asked. She still remembered the creatures they had encountered in the dormitory building. If it hadn't been for Charles, they would be dead now. Charles said, "If you follow me, it will be even more dangerous. Also, you all already have the ability to protect yourselves. Of course, the prerequisite is that you all need to calm down. Even ordinary people could survive in the apocalypse for a few months. Excluding the simply unlucky, those who died usually lost their self-control when encountering danger. There were also those who were dragged down by those who had lost their heads. Charles, in his previous life, had almost been killed by his classmates in such circumstances. Alice thought it over and said, "I will protect us here." She was a paranormal after all. She believed she had the ability to protect the others. Charles took out a map and drew a few routes on it. He said, "If you encounter any danger forcing you to retreat, follow these routes. Our destination is here." As he spoke, he circled the place on the map. Harper's eyes lit up. "Is this a secret code? Do you have classified information?" Charles said, "Don't believe stupid TV dramas. Cute tricks like secret signals and codes, most of the time, only cause more trouble." Alice nodded. "I will remember." Charles then left the villa. Seeing Charles leave, the bodyguards' eyes lit up. They gathered and whispered to each other. They said, "That guy who seems to know the power arts has left. This is a good opportunity. The only thing we need to worry about now is Neil. The 4 people Neil brought in who are loyal to Miss Haley, let them protect her. We just need to find an excuse to go out. But we still need to find a way to get rid of him. Otherwise, after he finds out what we did, he will definitely kill us." How about this? The group of bodyguards quickly formulated a plan. A short while later, a bodyguard came up to Neil and said, "Captain, we are almost done with the food we brought. Why don't we—" Neil interrupted him. "There is some in the trunk of the car. Don't expect it to taste good. And if you complain, don't let me hear you." Hearing Neil's words, the bodyguard became frustrated. He hadn't expected Neil to have a ready answer, but Neil was a person who was always prepared for a rainy day. The bodyguards gathered in a circle again and said, "Don't make a fool of yourself in front of the captain. He's not some effete officer. I hear that people from the ancient power families are very serious when it comes to fighting. The captain was chased out because he failed to seize power. What a piece of trash. Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's think of something." The bodyguards were bad men in the first place, and the constant dangers of the outside world, the risks of energy deviation, and the possession of power without the license to use it had driven them to the brink. A thin-faced bodyguard spoke up. "I have a way." Everyone surrounded him. He asked, "What do you guys think the captain and Miss Haley care about the most?" "Obviously whether the army will come or not." "Then we will do this." A motorcycle sped through the streets and easily bypassed the zombies staggering around. Charles felt that his luck was good. Finding a complete working motorcycle right now was much harder than finding an ordinary car. He had already memorized the map of Cambridge, Ohio, and quickly figured out a relatively direct route. When he had searched for his sister in his previous life, he had also traveled there. Although there had been some changes, the general layout should have remained the same. He quickly arrived at the edge of the city and saw an intense battle occurring in the distance. A group of white wraiths and medicinal zombies were besieging the army. Usually, when mutated animals faced the large army, they instinctively chose to back off. Only these creatures, completely without intelligence or the instinct of self-preservation, just stubbornly attacked. These monsters weren't too much of a threat to armed soldiers. The army quickly took control of the situation. The greater threat was posed by the people they were protecting. The soldiers desperately tried to stabilize the crowd while continuing to pick off the creatures advancing on them. The troopers yelled, "Everyone, don't panic! Calm down! We still have a lot of search and rescue work to do. Please wait patiently." The crowd cried, "Wow! Mommy! I want Mommy!" Why are we staying here? When can we continue our journey? We still have to get to a safe place. I don't want to eat compressed biscuits. I want to eat hamburgers. Now that the monsters have basically been neutralized, these people were causing trouble. Actually, they were only venting their uneasiness. However, they did not dare to vent it on one another, so the army bore the brunt of their frustration. Bang! A gunshot silenced the complaining people.